AppleDeclined by Robert P. Wills. What came before on Earth? The Earth was dying, even as the humans that occupied it raced to achieve unimaginable feats. Linear accelerators, or LINACs, ushered in a new era of scientific advances for the Earth. The earliest designs of linear accelerators were operational in the early parts of the 20th century. By the late 21st century, several accelerators were online and operating. On March 2nd, 2124, at the Kern LINAC in Switzerland, particles were reliably measured, traveling faster than light. In fact, in the early 21st century, scientists at that very same facility thought they had sent neutrinos faster than light to a laboratory in Italy. They were disappointed, however, to discover that improperly synchronized GPS sensors had given false readings. They were vindicated less than 50 years later. By the early 22nd century, the four operating LINACs were routinely pushing particles faster than the speed of light. With the majority of scientists focusing on faster-than-light, or FTL, travel, other sciences were put at the bottom of the funding lists, if they were even there at all. With this new enlightened age of FTL capability, scientific advances moved forward by leaps and bounds, as did the population, and along with it, its appetite for transportation, goods, and, of course, food and water. By the middle of the 22nd century, the Earth's population topped 15 billion. It was then that the first of several plagues ravaged the planet. First in Africa, then Asia. Both continents were dealing with a population explosion they could neither support nor contain. Movement north and west, respectively, brought these plagues to Europe with devastating effects. Feeling immune, thanks to the oceans protecting them, the state governments of the United Americas, 85 in all, did little to prepare themselves. Even more damning, the politicians in the state of the District of Columbia felt especially immune in their bastion of power, and did little besides passing laws to enforce strict immigration policies. Thousands of miles of porous borders along both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, from the North to the South Poles, made these laws moot. Within 2 decades of the first cases being registered in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the United Americas joined the rest of the world as its population was decimated. By the end of the century, the Earth's population had dropped from just over 15 billion to 4 million, a number it had not seen in almost 35,000 years. Virus flare-ups, starvation, and radiation poisoning continued to reduce that number to half that. Earth was barely populated. There were those that saw the culling of the herd, as it was called, a good thing. Thanks to being sequestered from the general population, the wealthy, politicians, and scientists bore a disproportionately small percentage of the deaths. Even so, the damage to the Earth had been done. The land, air, and water bore the full brunt of nearly 15 billion buried or burned bodies, cities set ablaze, as well as the countless nuclear weapons used as a last resort to fend off a neighboring country's overrunning population. In classic science fiction, great domes were placed over entire cities to provide clean air to its citizens. It was just that, science fiction. More practical means of protection were implemented by the remaining population. Respirators were quickly developed to wear while outdoors. Transportation was reconfigured to use air purifiers for passengers, as were homes and buildings. Humans resorted to quickly moving from one artificial atmosphere to another. Food and water was processed and recycled, with only the least contaminated being used over and over. While no new Linux had been built during the devastation, called the calling by everyone now, the dozen that were still operational had continued to make advances in FTL particle projection, speeds just over twice the speed of light were routinely being registered. The increases in speed had been coming in smaller and smaller increments, however. Ultimately, it was the Bonneville Linear Accelerator, BLAC officially, Black Lightning unofficially, in Utah that achieved the fastest speed beyond that of light, roughly 2.25 times faster than C. The scientists brag that it was due to the location's heritage for speed. The truth, however, was that the Bonneville ENAC was the fastest because it was also the longest accelerator on Earth, 30 miles in all. The terrestrial upper limit of speed had been reached by their accelerator. Soon after that, the Black Lightning Laboratories proposed a new, longer accelerator to reach even faster speeds, as well as its location, space. The scientists assured the politicians that a longer, more efficient accelerator could be built in one of the 5 gravity-neutral points between the Earth and the Moon, designated EML1 to EML5. It would also be able to produce a nearly continuous stream of particles. Within 10 years, the 50-mile-long EML3 linear accelerator was operational. Thanks to the combination of previous naming conventions and the awkward designation of its location, it was merely called Space 1. Within 2 years, speeds reaching 10 times the speed of light were reached, now with heavy particles. Still, there were limitations. The most prevalent one was that Space 1 had to be continuously repositioned due to the forces caused by the particles' movement. The linear accelerators built at the other EML locations, Space 2 through 5, were designed with more robust stabilization thrusters. Because of this, it was inevitable that several bored scientists aboard the original Space 1 would join it with its storage container of projectile material, a living compartment. And in direct defiance of the President of the United Americas, started its maiden voyage on 15 July 2362. Space 1 crept away from its moorings with its linear accelerator split in half so it did not smash particles against each other. It fired them at 10 times the speed of light, almost continuously in one direction. Thanks to the twin 25-mile linear accelerators, by the time Space 1 reached Jupiter a week later, it was traveling at half C. A little over 20 minutes later, it passed Saturn, traveling at 3/4 C. Soon after, it silently streaked past the orbit of Selna, beyond Pluto, traveling twice the speed of light and accelerating steadily. As the ship sped onward, the scientists expected their acceleration to slow as the ship reached the speed of its LINAC emitters. However, it was discovered that the ship's LINACs propelled particles at whatever the ship's relative speed was, plus 10c, much like throwing an object from a fast-moving vehicle. It traveled, at least momentarily, at the speed it was thrown plus the speed of the vehicle. Unlimited acceleration. To a point, at least, the self-imposed limits of the amount of fuel and foodstuffs were the only things preventing humans from reaching unimaginable distances. After a month of continuous acceleration, the scientists decided to return to accept their punishment for stealing the craft. Unable to execute anything similar to a graceful turn, Space One turned on its axis and began firing its linear accelerator in the opposite direction. 2.5 months after it had left, Space One re-entered the solar system. By the time it returned to EML-3, it was being hailed by the president as the salvation of the human race. Planets for Earth's remaining inhabitants were now within reach. Project Earth 2 was born almost immediately. In a testament to his lifelong political career, the president took all the credit. Over the next 30 years, linear accelerators were paired with sensor arrays and sent towards the nearest solar systems, all within 50 light-years, to search out viable planets before Earth became completely inhospitable. Several planets were found that could support a portion of the population. Plans were made to split the population among the 4 most hospitable worlds. Then, another planet was discovered that would suit the entire population of Earth. Plans were rewritten. The main planet would be colonized, and once the population was settled, the other 4 would be used as smaller colonies, much like the ones on the Moon, Mars, Ceres, several of Saturn and Jupiter's moons, as well as the remote Sedna and superplanet Sedna II. Humans would still live in space. They would just have a new home world. This new planet had a flourishing ecosystem, abundant resources, and a comparable climate to Earth. It was also inhabited. A plan was developed to rid the planet of its current occupants by any means necessary, and establish a colony to accept the remaining population as soon as possible. The journey to the planet would take 6 months. The crew was to be given less than 1 month to prepare it for colonization. It was deemed more than enough time to deal with a barely post-Iron Age indigenous population of less than 50,000. Space 10 was brought online that same year, and Project Arcturus was born. On Arcturus, an apple was declined. All was well. Until an Earthling's probe found them. Chapter 1. Nick Hauser pivoted out of bed and let his feet hang down. They just barely hovered above the floor. Because Teresa wanted one of those old-fashioned high beds. Thinking of his wife, he looked over his shoulder. She wasn't there. Probably worked late at the lab and just slept there. Keep telling yourself that, Nick, he said out loud. He hopped onto the tile floor and padded to the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror. He was still as fit as a soldier would be expected to be. He flexed pectoral and latissimus muscles, hopping out. Toughest 65-year-old there is. He ran his hands through his hair, more gray than black now, but it still covered his entire head, or at least as much as he had allowed it to with the regulation flat-top haircut he had maintained for the past 42 years. You are a handsome devil, he said to himself. He looked back over his shoulder toward his bed, or more specifically the unused half of his bed. You might just have to kill someone today, handsome devil. After cleaning up and getting dressed in his flight suit with over 40 years of service, he didn't feel it was necessary to wear anything besides his flight uniform. How about we just leave the medals and shiny brass to the generals? That's what they do best. Flying is what I do best, he had snapped the last time someone had suggested he wear his dress uniform to a meeting. The general who suggested it frowned, but didn't press the issue. When all was said and done, there really wasn't much he could do to a Chief Warrant Officer 5. Demotions took the approval of the Senate and the Secretary of the Military. And since there was no higher rank, Nick didn't even receive performance evaluations. To add to the issue, there was a severe lack of senior pilots. The attack had been planned perfectly, catching a conference of 100 senior flight officers while they watched the demonstration of a new propulsion system for fighter jets. The large hangar they were in contained most of the blast, limiting the carnage to the attending officials, 4 technicians, numerous aides, and, of course, the young, impressionable lieutenant who was wearing almost 50 pounds of C-28 high explosive around his entire torso. Nick had missed the conference, only because he had been leading the defense of the Macapá spaceport in the state of Brazil. The spaceport of the middle of the world, as it was known, had come under attack from Brazilian separatists trying to commandeer a ship to the colonies of Mars. Like Nick's cohorts, none of the separatists survived the day. Nick walked into the main living area of his apartment. It took up most of the skyscraper's floor. In the middle of the space was a massive wood staircase that led to an equally large area above. It was, in fact, another apartment that he had acquired when the tenants had moved out. Thanks to a rapidly diminishing population, housing was abundant. Thanks to Nick's threats, the occupants left before they were, as he had said, added to the rapidly diminishing population. Since he was armed at the time, they even left all the furniture, taking only clothes and personal effects. The staircase was ordered and assembled by microbots over the course of 2 days. Nick immediately gave his 2 children, Nick Jr. and Samantha, full run of the top floor. Being 17 and 16, respectively, they were ecstatic. Had his wife been around more often, she would have objected. As it was almost 3 days before she saw the staircase, and by then the teenagers had completely moved in. When she finally did notice it, a day-long argument made him try to appease her by disabling the entranceway of the upper apartment so that the children would have to enter and exit through the main entranceway. The next day that his wife didn't come home, Nick gave Nicky and Samantha the code. "Coffee," Nick said to the kitchen as he sat on one of the stools that surrounded the large island. "Toast and eggs." He ran his hand across the black top of the counter, turning it on. He read the news as his breakfast was prepared from a bin of organic components and ultra-filtered water. "Make 2 servings," said Samantha as she came down the stairs. "Morning, Dad." "2 servings," he said. Nick turned off the display with another hand swipe. "Morning, Samantha." He had stopped calling her Sam when she turned 13 and had declared, "I am Samantha." He had enough conflict in his life as it was, so he immediately switched, with only occasional instances where he slipped up. They were sporadic enough she didn't correct him. Nick figured he could continue to call his 16-year-old daughter Sam about once a month without drawing her ire, so he did. "You're up early. Got a meeting or flying somewhere special?" Nick stood to retrieve the 2 plates from the bin as the cover rolled back. Meeting, unfortunately. He made no bones to anyone that flying was one of the few remaining joys in his life. Breakfast with his daughter was also at the top of the list. Big things going on at the MOD. There's always big things going on at the all-powerful Ministry of Defense, Dad. She smiled as she passed him a fork from the canister on the counter. "But it's got to be real important to bring you to an actual meeting," she smiled. "They promised you could fly once it was over?" "I'm going to do that no matter what," he eyed his daughter. "So when did you start drinking coffee?" "Since we took a trip out to the dairy factory for our health class." Nick stuck out his tongue. "Ignorance is bliss, I think." He handed her a cup of coffee. "Sugar, at least?" She nodded as she slid a spoon across the counter at him. "Chemicals I can deal with," she started. "Those cows are just—" "Eating. We're eating. We're not discussing the current state of affairs over at the Ministry of Consumables." Nick looked at the stairs. "Nicky up there?" Samantha shrugged noncommittally. "I didn't check. Probably, since it's a school day." She made a face as she drank her coffee. More sugar, I think." Nick didn't press the issue. With his son being 17, he allowed him quite a bit of freedom. "Want some creamer? That's made of nice, wholesome chemicals." He held up the brown canister. "Not a bit of milk in it, guaranteed." Samantha nodded. "I think so." He passed the canister to her. "So, how's school going?" Another shrug. "Fine, I suppose. We're all getting hammered on biotech and agriculture." Samantha dropped her voice to an official tone. "So you young people will all be vital assets when the colonization process begins. Remember that everyone must do their part for humanity to endure. Would you like to know more? Click here." Nick laughed. "We tell the young troops the same thing. Don't let it get you down." "How much, time do we actually have left?" Samantha asked, suddenly serious. Torn between telling her the truth and what the one-gen publicized, he decided to go with the former. "About 90 years. He smiled. "We'll be long gone from this rock by then." "You sure?" She took a tentative sip of her coffee. With a nod that she had finally put enough creamer in it, she turned to her eggs. "Yep, that's what this meeting's about. I think we've got another candidate to have checked out." Samantha pushed her eggs to one side of her mouth. "That makes, what, 5 or 6? "Something like that. I was told last night that this one might be big." Samantha raised her eyebrows. "A mega-planetoid? How could we live on that?" No. A planet that we could all move to instead of spreading out across half a dozen planets. It's supposed to be ideal." Samantha frowned. "So no one lives on it now?" Nick took a long sip of coffee to buy himself time. It was highly classified that they had already eliminated 2 undeveloped sentient races from planets as part of the colonization process. One was pre-Stone Age. They were hardly more than animals living in caves and speaking a rudimentary language. The other seemed to have a very intelligent insect life, or at least it did. He had not heard of any intelligent indigenous species on this latest planet. Not that I've heard, he finally said as he put down his cup. We're probably going to have to fly out there and confirm what the survey probes already saw. Get things ready for the main push. Just to be sure? Nick nodded as he finished his coffee. Just to be sure. He put his cup down. Can you pitch these in the washer? I need to get going. Thanks to those 1-gen nuts blowing up the station at the MOD. Sure, Dad. See you, Sam, he said with a wave to his daughter. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, a boy peeked down from upstairs. He's gone? Samantha nodded at him. Yeah, he's gone. He moved to the food processor. Eggs,